They tell me I should feel pride. The commissars speak of duty fulfilled, of valor beyond measure, of a small band of faithful servants who held the line when the galaxy itself seemed to tear apart. They have already begun composing the official account, the one that will appear in the regimental histories, the one that will be read aloud at ceremonies and painted onto banners that will hang in the chapels of worlds I will never see. In that version, we are heroes. In that version, what we did makes sense. I am the last one left who knows what actually happened on Corveth Minor, and soon I will not be left at all. The Medicae says the corruption has spread too far, that the things growing inside my chest cavity are beyond even the most aggressive surgery. She says this with the flat, practiced tone of someone who has delivered such news 1,000 times. I do not blame her. I have seen what grows beneath my ribs, on the picked captures, the way the tissue has reorganized itself into patterns that should not exist, spiraling inward towards something that pulses with a light the cogitators cannot properly render. The machine spirits refuse to focus on it. Perhaps they are wiser than we give them credit for. I have 3 days, perhaps 4. The inquisitorial representative has already been here, asking his careful questions, making his careful notes. He wanted to know about the ritual site. He wanted to know about Sergeant Vaughan's final words. He wanted to know why I alone survived when 11 others fell, and whether I noticed any changes in my thoughts or feelings in the days that followed. I told him everything I could remember, and he nodded and wrote and nodded again, and when he left, he posted 2 guards outside my door who are not from my regiment and who do not speak to me. I understand. In his position, I would do the same, but he did not ask me to write this, and perhaps that is why I must. The official account will speak of heroism and sacrifice. It will speak of faith rewarded and corruption purged. It will not speak of what we actually saw in those tunnels, or what Vaughan discovered about the nature of our enemy, or why I suspect, though I cannot prove it, and would not dare say so aloud, that we did not stop the incursion at all, that we were never meant to stop it, that we were part of it from the beginning, pieces in a game whose rules we never understood, and that the thing which sleeps beneath Corveth Minor is sleeping still, dreaming dreams that leak into the waking world like oil spreading across water. I will start at the beginning, though the beginning is harder to locate than you might think. Does it begin when the 53rd Corveth Rifles received deployment orders to the mining complex? Does it begin when the astropathic choir first reported the disturbance in the local warp currents? Does it begin 1,000 years earlier, when the first colonists broke ground on that emperor-forsaken rock and discovered, deep beneath the surface, the remains of something that predated human presence in the system by epochs uncounted? I think it begins with the smell. That is what I remember most clearly about our arrival, the smell that greeted us when we disembarked from the Valkyrie and stepped onto the landing pad at mining station Tertius. The briefings had told us to expect industrial odors, promethium, lubricant, the chemical stink of ore processing. What we found instead was something else entirely. Sweet, but not pleasantly so. Cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water, mixed with something metallic that caught in the back of the throat. Private Keth was the first to comment on it. He had a poet's sensibility. Keth did a strange quality in a guardsman, and one that the others mocked him for, though never cruelly. He said the smell reminded him of his grandmother's sick room in the days before she passed. He said it smelled like the moment between life and death, stretched out and held in place. The rest of us laughed, because that was what you did when Keth said things like that. But I noticed that no one laughed very hard, and that afterward we all breathed a little more shallowly, as if trying to take in as little of that air as possible. Sergeant Vaughan gathered us in the shadow of the refinery towers and laid out our mission. 12 of us in total, all that could be spared from the main force, which was dealing with an uprising in the southern habitation blocks. The miners had been restless for months, missed quota payments, reduced rations, the usual grievances that built up in places like this until they finally boiled over. Nothing the regiment hadn't handled before. But 3 days ago, all contact with mining station Tertius had ceased, not gradually, not with a final distress call or a warning of attack. Simply stopped. The last transmission had been a routine production report, cut off mid-sentence. Our orders were to investigate, secure any survivors, and eliminate any hostile elements. Standard pacification protocol. We had done this a dozen times on a dozen worlds. The smell should have warned us that this time would be different, but we were young, and we were confident, and we trusted in the weapons we carried, and the Emperor we served. Vaughn was not young, and I wonder now how much he suspected even then. He had been with the 53rd for longer than anyone could remember, had fought in campaigns whose names had been struck from official records, had earned medals that he never wore, and scars that he never discussed. The other sergeants treated him with a wary respect that suggested they knew things about him that we did not. When he looked at those silent refinery towers, at the empty landing pads, and the darkened windows of the administrative blocks, something passed across his face that might have been recognition. He split us into 2 fire teams and ordered us forward. The complex was laid out in concentric rings around the central shaft, the great wound in the planet's surface that descended 17 kilometers to the primary ore deposits. The outermost ring held the residential blocks, the commissary, the Medicae facilities. The middle ring contained the administrative offices, the communications center, the small shrine to the Emperor that every Imperial installation was required to maintain. The innermost ring was industrial, processing plants, storage facilities, and the massive elevator assemblies that carried ore up from the depths and workers down into them. We found the first bodies in the residential ring. They had been arranged. That was the detail that struck me most forcefully, more than the manner of their deaths or the expressions frozen on their faces. Someone had taken the time to position them in patterns, spiraling outward from central points, arms and legs extended to form shapes that seemed almost geometrically precise. There were 17 bodies in the first chamber we entered, and it took me several minutes to realize that they formed a perfect 9-pointed star when viewed from above. Corporal Dren, who had served with the Arbites before joining the Guard, recognized the configuration before anyone else. She pulled Vaughn aside and spoke to him in low tones, and I saw his face go pale beneath the accumulated grime of 100 battlefields. When he turned back to us, his voice was steady, but there was something new in his eyes, a weight that had not been there before. He told us to fix bayonets. I should explain what that meant to us. The 53rd was a mechanized regiment, trained to fight from Chimera transports, to support armored advances, to lay down suppressing fire, while heavier units did the close work. We carried bayonets because regulations required it, but most of us had never fixed them in actual combat. The order meant that Vaughn expected close-quarters fighting, the kind where las weapons might not be enough, where you would need to put steel into flesh and feel the resistance of bone. We advanced more carefully after that. Dren took point, her Hell gun sweeping in precise arcs as she cleared each corner. The rest of us followed in standard column formation, spacing maintained despite the growing urge to cluster together for comfort. The smell was stronger here, and I noticed that it pulsed, growing more intense and then fading in a rhythm that seemed almost biological, like breathing, like something vast and invisible was inhaling and exhaling around us. The bodies became more numerous as we pushed toward the administrative ring. More patterns, more configurations, each more complex than the last. The dead were miners, administrators, adepts, servitors, anyone and everyone who had lived and worked in this place. Some had clearly fought back. We found las burns on walls, evidence of barricades hastily constructed and then overrun, but most had simply participated. They had walked to their assigned positions and died there willingly, as if following instructions only they could hear. In the communication center, we found the logs. Tech Priest Vulcan, the squad's designated cogitator specialist, interfaced with the damaged systems and extracted what data remained. Most of it was corrupted beyond recovery, but fragments survived. Production reports, shift schedules, personal messages that would never reach their intended recipients. And one file, flagged with priority seals that Vulcan had to override 3 times before the machine spirit would release it. It was a personal journal, kept by the station's senior administrator, a man named Grelt, whose body we would later find in the shrine, his hands folded across his chest and his eyes replaced by symbols I still see when I close my own eyes at night. The entries began normally enough. Complaints about supply shipments, notes about personnel disputes, the mundane concerns of a man tasked with keeping a remote mining operation functioning. But 3 weeks before the final transmission, the tone shifted. He began to write about dreams. They had started small, he said. Images of the tunnels below, of the ore deposits, and the rock formations, and the ancient geological features that the mining operations were slowly excavating. Nothing unusual for a man who spent his days worrying about extraction quotas and equipment maintenance, but the dreams grew more detailed, more insistent. He began to see things in the rock that should not have been there, structures that predated the colony by millions of years, surfaces covered in markings that seemed to writhe at the edges of his vision, and at the center of it all, deep beneath the lowest level of the mining operation, something that waited. He wrote that it spoke to him. Not in words, exactly, but in impressions, in feelings that translated themselves into understanding. It told him what it needed. It told him what would happen to those who provided it. And it told him what would happen if they refused. The last entry was dated 2 days before the final transmission. In it, Grelt wrote that he had called an all-hands meeting. He wrote that he had explained everything to the colonists, the presence beneath them, its nature, its requirements. He wrote that they had voted, and that the vote had been unanimous. They had chosen to serve. Vaughn ordered us to continue toward the shrine. I need you to understand that we were not prepared for what we found there. In the official histories, this is the moment when the heroism begins, when the stalwart soldiers of the 53rd confronted the demonic incursion and, through faith and firepower, drove it back. The reality was messier. The reality was 12 exhausted guardsmen standing in the doorway of a defiled shrine, staring at something that our minds refused to properly process, while our hands shook on our weapons and our hearts hammered against our ribs. The shrine had been transformed. The sacred aquila that had hung above the altar had been inverted and grown into. Flesh and metal had merged, creating something that was neither symbol nor organism but both simultaneously. The walls were covered in the same markings we had seen in Grelt's journal descriptions, spiraling, fractal patterns that seemed to move when you looked at them directly and freeze when you glanced away. And at the center of it all, kneeling before the corrupted altar in attitudes of prayer, were the remaining colonists. They were alive. That was the worst part. They turned to look at us as we entered, and their eyes were still human, still capable of recognition and response. They smiled at us, warm, welcoming smiles, the kind you might offer to expected guests arriving for a celebration. One of them, a woman whose mining overalls marked her as a shift supervisor, actually spoke. She said, "You're late. He's been waiting." Then the floor gave way. We fell for what felt like minutes, but could only have been seconds. The shaft had opened beneath us, a perfectly circular aperture that swallowed all 12 of us before anyone could react. I remember the sensation of rushing air, the glimpse of rock walls carved with those impossible patterns, the growing intensity of that sweet, sick smell. I remember hitting something that yielded slightly, like packed earth, and lying there stunned while screams echoed from somewhere nearby. When I could move again, I found that we had landed on a ledge jutting out from the shaft wall, perhaps 200 meters below the shrine level. 5 of us had survived the fall intact: myself, Vaughn, Dren, Keth, and Private Tomkin. The others. I will not describe what the impact had done to the others. It is enough to say that they were beyond help, and that Vaughn said the words over them quickly before ordering us to move. The ledge connected to a tunnel, not one of the mining passages shown on our maps, but something older, something that had been carved from the rock by hands that were not human and for purposes we could not imagine. The walls here were smooth, almost organic in their curves, and covered with those same spiraling patterns in lines that glowed faintly with a light that had no apparent source. The smell was overwhelming now, so thick that we could taste it with every breath. Vaughn led us into the darkness. We walked for hours. The tunnel branched and twisted, but Vaughn navigated it with a certainty that troubled me even then, as if he had been here before, or had studied maps that the rest of us had never seen. The glow from the wall markings provided enough illumination to see by, though the light played tricks with depth perception, making distances impossible to judge. Sometimes the passage seemed to stretch for kilometers. Sometimes it seemed to compress until the walls nearly touched our shoulders. We passed chambers. Some were empty except for the markings. Others contained things I have tried very hard to forget. Arrangements of bone that formed structures too complex for human construction, pools of liquid that reflected light that was not present in the visible spectrum, and only once a mirror-smooth surface that showed our reflections wrong, showed us as we would become if we continued, as we were already becoming whether we continued or not. Keth stopped in front of that mirror and would not move until Vaughn physically dragged him away. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. He said that he understood now, that he could see the patterns in everything, that the universe was a story being told by something that did not distinguish between author and character. Dren wanted to execute him then and there as a contamination risk, but Vaughn refused. He said we would need everyone if we were going to reach the source. The source. He spoke as if he knew what waited at the end of these tunnels, as if he had always known, as if the mission briefings and the standard protocols had been nothing but performance, a story told to convince us to go where we needed to be. I should have demanded answers then. I should have forced him to explain what he knew and how he knew it. But I was tired and I was afraid, and there was something about those tunnels that made questioning anything seem pointless. We were flowing towards something, all of us, like water, seeking its lowest level. Fighting the current felt impossible, so we kept walking. The breakthrough came without warning. One moment we were in the tunnel, the walls pressing close, the smell thick enough to choke on. The next, we emerged into a space so vast that our lamp packs could not find the walls or ceiling. The floor beneath our feet was black and glassy, reflecting our lights back at us like a dark mirror. And at the center of that impossible space, perhaps a kilometer distant, something rose. I cannot describe it properly. The human brain is not equipped to process what we saw, and what remains in my memory are fragments, impressions, the after-images of something too bright and too dark to look at directly. I remember surfaces that curved in directions that did not exist, angles that added up to sums that contradicted themselves, and a sense of presence of being watched, examined, measured by something that saw us as we truly were, and found us interesting. Vaughn dropped to his knees. For a terrible moment, I thought he was praying to it, that he had been corrupted from the beginning, that he had led us here as sacrifices. But then I saw his hands moving, saw him pulling something from his kit that he had kept hidden throughout our deployment, a device, small and cylindrical, covered in seals of purity and warded with symbols that blazed with cold light against the darkness. "Melter charge," he said, his voice thick with something that might have been grief, sanctified by the Ordo Malleus themselves. One shot. It has to hit the anchor point, the place where it connects to our reality. "You knew," Dren said. It was not a question. I suspected. The Inquisition has been watching this system for decades. The colony was bait. When it finally manifested, when it finally reached through, he shook his head. "It doesn't matter now. All that matters is stopping it before it fully emerges." "How?" I asked. "How do we get close enough?" Vaughn looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before in any commanding officer. Honesty. Complete, terrible, liberating honesty. "We don't all need to get close," he said. "Just one of us. The rest provide distraction." The thing in the darkness shifted. Surfaces realigned themselves, angles that had been impossible somehow becoming more impossible still, and from somewhere within its depths, We heard voices, the colonists, the dead, everyone who had served the presence and been absorbed into it. They were singing, a hymn of sorts, though the words were in no language humanity had ever spoken, and the melody made me want to tear out my own ears to stop hearing it. The final engagement began. I will not pretend that what followed was tactical in any meaningful sense. We charged toward a thing that dwarfed any enemy we had ever faced, firing last bolts into surfaces that drank the energy without effect, while something vast and ancient turned its attention toward us with what might have been curiosity or amusement or hunger. We ran toward it because there was nothing else to do, because Vaughn had asked us to, because somewhere in our fear-numbed minds we still believed that faith and duty and the Emperor's blessing meant something. Keth was the first to fall. He stopped running suddenly, turned to face us, and spoke words that came from a mouth that was no longer entirely his. The thing was inside him now, had found the cracks that the mirror had opened in his mind, was speaking through him in a voice that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. It offered us understanding. It offered us peace. It offered us a place in the pattern that was being woven beneath Corveth Minor, a pattern that would eventually encompass the entire system, the sector, the galaxy itself. Dren shot him before he could finish. The last bolt caught him in the chest, and he folded without a sound, the expression on his face one of perfect serenity. Whatever had been speaking through him retreated, but it did not leave. I could feel it still, pressing against the edges of my mind, testing for weaknesses. We were closer now, close enough to see that the presence had an anchor, just as Vaughn had said, a column of something that might have been crystal, or might have been solidified light, connecting the entity to the black floor beneath it, close enough to see that the column was cracked, flawed, vulnerable. Tomkin died next. I did not see exactly what happened. One moment he was beside me, the next he was simply gone, erased so completely that for a moment I could not remember that he had ever existed. Vaughn grabbed my arm and pulled me forward, screaming something that might have been orders or prayers or both. Dren made it the furthest. She reached the base of the anchor column and raised her hellgun, pouring shot after shot into the crystalline surface. Cracks spread from her impact points, and the presence above us screamed a sound that was not a sound, a vibration that passed through matter and energy alike and left everything it touched subtly wrong. For a moment, I thought she might succeed on her own. Then something emerged from the column itself. I will not describe it in detail. The official report calls it a lesser manifestation, a fragment of the greater presence, given temporary form to defend the anchor. What I saw was a nightmare made flesh, a shape that changed every time I blinked, that was simultaneously beautiful and terrible beyond description. It moved toward Dren with a speed that defied physics, and she turned to face it with her weapon raised and her back straight, and she died the way she had lived, fighting, defiant, refusing to yield, even when yield was the only option left. The melter charge was still in Vaughn's hands. We were perhaps 50 meters from the column when he stopped running. I stopped beside him, gasping, my last gun nearly empty and my mind barely holding together against the pressure of that vast attention. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he pressed the charge into my hands. "I'll draw its focus," he said. "You finish the mission, Sergeant." "That's an order, Private." He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had ever seen on his face. "You're the last. You carry the memory. Make sure they know what we did here, what actually happened, not what the Administratum decides to record." Before I could respond, he turned and ran toward the manifestation. I do not know exactly what Vaughn did in those final moments. I was running in the opposite direction, toward the anchor column, my entire being focused on the 50 meters I needed to cover. But I heard the sounds behind me, last fire, screaming, something that might have been laughter or might have been weeping. I heard Vaughn's voice raised in what was unmistakably a prayer, though the words were in a dialect I did not recognize, and I felt the pressure of the presence shift, turn, focus on the small, defiant human who dared to challenge it directly. I reached the column. The cracks Dren had made were still there, spreading slowly, and at their center I could see something pulsing, a light that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely, somewhere that existed outside of space and time. The anchor point. The connection. I armed the melter charge and threw myself against the column. The explosion was indescribable. Melter weapons work by generating a burst of subatomic agitation, converting solid matter into superheated vapor. This one had been modified by the Ordo Malleus, enhanced with wards and bindings that targeted the connection between material and immaterial. When it detonated, the column did not simply melt or shatter, it unmade itself, collapsing inward toward a point that existed in dimensions I could not perceive. The presence screamed again, and this time the scream was different, weaker, diminished. I felt the pressure on my mind recede, felt the constant weight of that attention lighten for the first time since we had entered the tunnels. The spiraling patterns on the walls began to fade. The sweet, sick smell began to thin. I thought we had won. I lay there for a long time, half-conscious, my body battered by the explosion's backwash, but somehow still alive. When I finally managed to stand, the vast chamber was dark, not the living darkness that had filled it before, but simple, ordinary absence of light. My lamp pack still functioned, and by its beam I searched for survivors. There were none. Vaughn's body I found near the center of the chamber, broken in ways that suggested the manifestation had taken its time with him. His face was peaceful, though, and his hands were still clasped around his rosarius. Whatever he had faced at the end, he had not lost faith. I found the exit tunnel by following the wall until I reached an opening. The climb back up took most of a day, and there were moments when I considered simply lying down and letting the darkness take me. But something drove me upward, the need to bear witness, perhaps, or the simpler biological imperative to survive. The Valkyrie picked me up 2 days later. I had emerged on the surface several kilometers from our original landing zone, in an area that the maps marked as unexplored. The relief force found me curled in the shadow of a rock formation, dehydrated and delirious, mumbling about patterns in the stone. That was 3 weeks ago. In the official account, the mission was a success. A demonic incursion was detected, engaged, and eliminated by a single squad of the 53rd Corvette Rifles, at the cost of 11 brave soldiers who gave their lives in service to the Emperor. The mining complex has been purged and reconsecrated. Production will resume within the year, but I have seen the geological surveys. I have read the reports that the Administratum does not know I have accessed. And I know things that the official account does not include. The anchor was damaged, not destroyed. The presence was pushed back, not eliminated. The patterns on those tunnel walls, the ones that seemed to fade after the explosion, have begun to reappear in the lower mining levels. The new workers report dreams. They report hearing singing in the deep places where no one should be. And I carry something inside me now. The Medicae says it is corruption, contamination from exposure to warp energy. Perhaps she is right, but when I close my eyes, I see the pattern that Keth saw, the one that encompasses everything, and I understand things I should not understand. I know that what sleeps beneath Corvette Minor is old, older than humanity, older than the galaxy itself. I know that it has slept before and awakened before, that civilizations beyond counting have risen and fallen in its shadow, that the cycles of its dreaming are measured in epochs. I know that it is patient. The melter charge bought time, years, perhaps decades, long enough for the Inquisition to deploy more permanent solutions, if they act quickly. But they will not act quickly. They will debate and investigate and analyze, and by the time they decide on a course of action, the pattern will have spread, the dreams will have deepened, and the presence will have found new anchors, new connections, new servants to sing its hymns. I know this because I am one of them now. Not willingly, I did not choose this, would unmake it if I could. But the thing that grows inside me is not simply corruption, it is communication. The presence speaks to me now, in the quiet moments before sleep, and what it tells me chills me more than any physical horror ever could. It tells me that we were expected, that Vaughn's mission, his secret knowledge, His sanctified melter charge, all of it was known, anticipated, incorporated into the pattern. We did not defeat the incursion. We completed a phase of it. The deaths, the sacrifice, the apparent victory, all of it served purposes we cannot comprehend, advanced an agenda that stretches across millennia. The pattern needs breaking to grow stronger. It needs resistance to incorporate new elements. Every battle, every victory, every moment of heroic defiance, they are all threads being woven into something larger, something final. Vaughn understood this at the end. I know because his prayer, the one in the strange dialect, I recognize it now. It was not a prayer to the Emperor. It was an apology. He was speaking to whatever came before, to the first ones who had faced this presence and realized, too late, that fighting it only fed it. He was apologizing for what he was about to do. In 3 days, perhaps 4, I will be dead. The inquisitorial representative will claim my body for study, looking for clues to the presence's nature and weaknesses. He will find the growth in my chest cavity and dissect it carefully, hoping to learn its secrets. And when he does, when he opens the thing that has been growing inside me, he will release the gift I have been carrying. The presence is patient, but it is also efficient. It does not waste opportunities. Every death serves the pattern. Every sacrifice advances the design, even mine. Even this confession. I could have kept silent. I could have let the official account stand unchallenged, let the Imperium believe that heroism and faith were enough, that 12 ordinary soldiers could stop a daemonic incursion through courage and firepower. But the presence wanted the truth told. It wanted someone to write down what actually happened, to record the despair and the futility and the terrible realization that victory and defeat are meaningless concepts when facing something that thinks in geological time. Every time you read these words, you strengthen it. Every time you imagine the tunnels, the patterns, the thing that waits in the darkness, you create connections, neural pathways that mirror the spiraling designs, memories that echo the colonists' dreams. The presence spreads through stories, through songs, through prayers offered to the wrong gods, or the right gods for the wrong reasons. I have served it now, in writing this. Just as Vaughn served it in training me, in bringing me to Corveth Minor, in giving me the charge and the mission and the belief that any of it mattered. Do not mourn us, do not honor us, do not remember our names or our faces or the manner of our deaths. Forget that the 53rd ever existed, that Corveth Minor ever had a colony, that any of this ever happened. It will not save you. Nothing can save you. The pattern has already spread too far, rooted itself too deeply in humanity's collective unconscious. But forgetting might buy you time, might give you a few more years of ignorance before the singing starts, before the dreams begin, before you wake one morning and realize that you have always known the truth, have always served the presence, have always been part of the design. The official account says we stopped a Daemon incursion. The official account is a lie told by an empire that cannot admit the truth about the things it fights, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that the fight itself is futile. We did not stop anything. We only made it stronger. The guard outside my door is changing shifts now. I can hear them speaking in low voices, discussing protocols and rotation schedules and the proper procedure for handling a contaminated corpse. They are good soldiers, faithful servants of an Imperium they believe is worth preserving. They have not started dreaming yet. I wonder how long it will take. I wonder if, when they finally understand, they will feel what I feel now, this strange, terrible peace that comes from accepting inevitability, this relief at no longer needing to hope, this quiet joy at being part of something vast, something eternal, something that will endure long after humanity has joined the countless species that served the presence and were consumed by it. The smell is strong now, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It fills this room, seeps from my pores, rises from the thing growing in my chest. The singing has started. I do not think I have 3 days after all. The pattern completes itself in its own time. All I can do is wait, and write, and pray that someone reading this will have the wisdom to burn it before they finish. You will not burn it. You never do.